Directions. Divide using partial quotients. Check your answer with multiplication. Make sure you are using your paper to solve and check your answer. So make sure you have your paper in front of you. We're going to solve the problem 4,136 divided by 7. So on your paper, we're going to write 4,136 divided by 7. In order to stay organized, we're going to draw a line down from our division sign. On the left side, we're going to be taking away multiples of 7. We call this repeated subtraction. On the right side, we will be figuring out how many groups of 7 are there in the amount that we took away. Remember, if at any time during this video I'm going too fast, you can pause the video and finish writing down whatever you need. Also, you can rewind to go back and hear something again. The goal of using partial quotients as our division strategy is to really be able to think about how many groups of 7 are there in 4,136. So we think about multiples of 7 and we take away groups of multiples of 7. In order to easily think about multiples of 7, we use a strategy called benchmarks. Benchmarks help us think about how many groups of 7 there is in our dividend. Let's begin with one group of 7. One group of, when we see multiplication, we can think about groups of. One group of 7 is, there'd be 7 total. Then let's try 5 groups, because 5 is an easy number for us to multiply by. 5 groups of 7 would be 35. Then let's try 10, because 10 is an easy number to multiply by. 10 groups of 7 would be 70. So now we're up to 70. 4,000 is much larger than 70, so we're going to keep looking for larger benchmarks. So we know what 1 times 7 is and 5 times 7. So let's try 50 times 7 because that will let us use our patterns of 10 and we can easily figure out what 50 times 7 is because we already know what 5 times 7 is. So we know that 5 times 7 is 35, but this is 5 tens, so 35 is going to be in the tens place, so we need a 0 in the ones place. So 50 times 7 is 350. That's still pretty small compared to 4,000, so let's keep going. Now we can try, we did 10, we did 50, let's try 100. We can use our patterns of 10 to multiply 100 times 7. We probably already know this. 100 times 7 is 700. Let's try 500. Using our patterns of 10, we know 5 times 7 is 35. And then we have 35 hundreds. So 35 is in the hundreds place, which means we need a 0 in the tens and a 0 in the ones. Now this number is close to 4,136. Let's try taking away 3,500. In the ones place, 6 minus 0 is 6. 3 minus 0 is 3. 1 minus 5. Oh, we can't do 1 minus 5. So let's go to the thousands place and regroup this 4. Now we are going to have 3 thousands because we're taking one of those thousands and making it into 10 hundreds, which gives us 11 hundreds. 11 hundreds minus 5 hundreds is 600, and 3 minus 3 is no thousands. Before we move on, we need to think about 3,500 has how many groups of 7? Well, over in our benchmarks, we can see that 3,500 was 500 groups of 7. So next to 3,500, we're going to write that that was 500 groups of 7. All right, now we can continue. We have 636. When we come back to our benchmarks, we can't take away 3,500 because that's too large. So we're just going to cross that one out. We can't take away 700 because that's also too large. We can take away 350. But if we take away 350, we're going to have a lot more subtracting to do. And we don't want to keep subtracting and subtracting and subtracting. We want to be able to use our benchmarks and do more mental math to make this problem simpler. So we're going to say, well, I would prefer if it was a larger number than 350. So instead of taking 50 groups, that's a little small. I know it's more than 50 groups of 7, but 100 groups of 7 was too big. So I need to think of how many groups are in between here that might be close to 636. Well, in the middle would be like 70 or 80. I could try 70 times 7 or 80 times 7. Let's try 80 times 7. Using our patterns of 10, we know that 8 times 7 is 56. But 8 tens means that 56 is in the tens place and we need a 0 in the ones place. Yes, 560 is much easier to take away from 636. All right, now it's time to subtract. 6 minus 0 is 6. 3 minus 6, oh, we can't do that. We need to regroup from the hundreds place, use one of our hundreds, and 100 is the same as 10 tens, so now we have 13 tens. I'm going to write that in black so you can see the 13 tens. And then 13 minus 6 is 7. So before we go on and subtract again, we need to say how many groups of 7 are in 560. In 560, there are 80 groups of 7. So we're going to write 80 and show that 80 groups of 7 is in 560. Now we have 76 remaining. How many groups of 7 are in 76? Well, over here, I know 700 is too big. 350 is too big. 70 I can definitely take away. 76 minus 70 is 6. How many groups of 7 are in 70? In 70, there are 10 groups of 7. So we're going to write 10 groups of 7 are in 70. And now we have 6. How many groups of 7 are in 6? There are no groups of 7, so this 6 becomes 6 left over because it's smaller than 7, because there are not 7 left that we can divide into an equal group. So in order to find out what our answer is to 4,136 divided by 7, we need to count up our total number of groups. So let's add up 500 plus 80 plus 10. 500 plus 80 is 580, plus 10 more is 590. And then we need to remember that we had 6 left over. So we're going to write remainder 6. Now if this was in a word problem, the remainder 6 might mean something else. For example, these might be 6 extra people, and we don't want to forget them, so we might have to make another group. There are many different situations, and the remainder has different meanings depending on the context. So we'll continue to work on that when we're working on word problems. Before you go on to the next slide and type in your answer, I want you to think, is 590 remainder 6 the correct answer? And you're probably thinking, yes, I just did this whole video with you, it's correct. But we're going to check our answer just so that we can be safe. And when you're doing division by yourself, you should always check your answer. In division, the number that we begin with is called the dividend. In this problem, 4,136 is our dividend. Then we're dividing the dividend into groups, and that number is called the divisor. In this problem, our divisor is 7, and our answer is called the quotient. The quotient that we found was 590. And then we also have a remainder. Those are the numbers left over, and we had a remainder of 6. So when we check, because division is the inverse of multiplication, we're going to take our quotient, our answer, and multiply it times the divisor. So go ahead and you're going to take our quotient, 590, and multiply it times the divisor. Our divisor was 7. So go ahead and pause the video so that you can multiply this. I'm going to multiply using partial products. So that's where I multiply the ones times the ones. I have 0 times 7. 0 times 7 is 0. Then we multiply the tens times the ones. But the tens, we're going to talk about the value. So that 9 is actually worth 90. So we have 90 times 7. I know that 9 times 7 is 63. And then we have 63 tens. So that would be 630. And then we're going to multiply the hundreds times the ones. So this 5 does not have a value of 5. It has a value of 500. 500 times 7 is, well, I know 5 times 7 is 35. And I have 5 hundreds, so I have 35 hundreds, which means there's going to be a 0 in the ones, a 0 in the tens, and 35 ends in my hundreds place. Go ahead and add those together. The answer that you got should be close to our dividend. If it's not our dividend, that's because we still need to add our remainder. So once we get our answer here, do the quotient times the divisor, we need to add our remainder. So our remainder was 6. So we will add 6 ones and see if that gives us our dividend. Our dividend is 4,136. If you got the dividend here, you did your problem completely correct. Your division was correct and your multiplication for checking it is correct. If when you're checking your work, you do not get your dividend, you want to go back and first check that your multiplication is correct, then that your addition is correct. If you're still not getting your dividend, then the problem is with the division that we did before. So always go back and check your benchmarks, then check the subtraction, and then check that you wrote the correct number of groups by looking at your benchmarks. So 3,500 was 500 groups. On the next slide, go ahead and write your answer, 590 remainder 6, where the blue question mark is.